afternoon, and thanks for joining us across the fence. I'm Keith Silva. I don't know about you, but I get downright romantic, or at least poetic, when I see an old barn off in the distance when I'm driving, on the highway, or when I pass one along an old dirt road somewhere. There's something about the permanence and integrity of those weather-beaten boards, that faded paint, that makes me wonder and makes me curious about what stories these buildings could tell when the paint was new and the wood freshly hewn. Preserving Old Barns, Preventing the Loss of a Valuable Resource was published in 2019 by the New Hampshire Division of Historical Resources with photos by Lowell H. Fuster, and it's co-authored by Francis E. Gilman and my guest today, John C. Porter. John has worn many hats in his life, from dairy farmer to extension agent for UNH Extension, to heading the New England Green Pastures Program, which annually presents the Dairy Farm of the Year Award for all 6 New England states. Welcome, John.
Thank you. Good to be with you again.
Good to be with you, sir. I mentioned in my introduction that I'm a bit of a romantic about old barns. I suspect you are too, but perhaps this book was just a way to pass the time.
Well, I tell people I probably grew up in a 1950s barn, spending more time there than the house, because probably starting at about age 5, I tagged along behind my father doing chores. And so I was growing up using these barns as part of our livelihood on a dairy farm. So I've always really liked old barns.
Someone once told me, because I don't like to shut doors, I must have been born in a barn. I was not, but that's maybe part of my connection. The subtitle of the book is a word in there that I can't get past: valuable. What makes an old barn? These old barns are old and therefore in disrepair. What makes them valuable, John?
Well, one thing I think is the connection to our past, and you can't help but marvel at these structures. When you go inside and you see the beams and the architecture and the hard work, and it just shows how hard our ancestors worked to settle this area, clear the fields, move the rocks, and build these great barns with their neighbors and put these structures up to grow their animals and milk cows and so forth. And then second of all, both Vermont and New Hampshire are active tourism states, and our tourism people that come here like to see these structures. I always say that barns are the next purest scenery to the mountains and the fields.
I would add stone walls, but maybe that's just me. There's another word in the title and the subtitle: loss. Are these barns being destroyed? Our eyes would tell us otherwise.
Well, we are losing them annually, some to development. If a big developer comes through and they're opening up a space for an apartment complex or a bank or something, the barn might be torn down. And then the winter does quite a number on these. Each winter we see a few that the snow builds up and these collapse. And as I travel the state, I see some of these disappearing season by season.
Who's this book for? Homeowners, folks who are buying a property and want to know what to do with the old barn on the place? Who's the book for, John?
So this started out being a handbook for barn owners, and I brought in Francis Gilman, a co-worker that was retired, and we did this kind of under the idea of a handbook in 2001, and then we started running out of copies in 2015, and finally did the second edition in 2019. Francis was still helping me a little bit on the final edition, and then he passed away before we got it published. He was in his 90s.
Let's talk about some of the pictures in the book. The first one, this is an English barn. Where is it, John?
Okay, it actually is about 2 miles from my house where I'm sitting right now. It's in Pennacook, New Hampshire. It's a double English, which we think was built originally as a double English, which is unusual. Most double Englishes were a barn that was added on to make it double. So being a double English from the start, it was a sign of a successful large farm. It was also built at the time of some of the northernmost English settlement in this area. And the thing that makes it really special to our community, it was almost destroyed by a developer a few years ago, and there was such a rallying of the community that the developer backed out of the project and money was raised to purchase it. So it's now part of the Pennacook Historical Society. It's across the street from the house they have, and it contains some of their artifacts.
Oh, wonderful. Do you get a sense of how many of these barns go back into agricultural use? Or do they end up like these historical societies you're talking about?
Well, unfortunately, the reason barns are going into disrepair is they aren't being used for the original intent. And when they were used for cows and livelihood, the farmers kept up with the roofs and the foundations and the painting and everything. And now a lot of these have been kind of abandoned. They're not efficient for modern agriculture. So some of them are just used for dry storage on existing farms. Some still have some cattle in them, but a lot of them tend to be vacant and just dry storage. And we're just hoping the owner is enough of a steward to take care of that still, but it does become expensive.
It's a really big shed to have on your property, just to store a lawnmower or some gardening tools. Many of these barns were obviously, as we've just been talking about, built to last. Do you notice that, how do they get refurbished? Because there were no Home Depots back then when they were built, no sort of lumber yards or anything that you could really go to. So I imagine that things aren't exactly plumb sometimes, and there's a lot of things that had to be taken into consideration if you're trying to restore one of these structures.
Somewhat. I mean, in the original construction, I mean, these people did a good job. In fact, some people wondered, how did farmers know how to do this? And we're pretty sure that there were probably joinery crews that traveled around and did some of the exact joinery. Then the farmers and their neighbors got together and put it up and assembled it. And so they were using some pretty good virgin timber and so forth. Uh, but over the years, they'll sag and bend. And we always say you got to focus on foundations and roofs to keep these barns upright and sound. And if you're not using it for your livelihood, you tend not to start focusing on those things. So in the old days of fixing them, basically, they went in the woods and cut trees and hewed them out. And those original barns were built from hewn timbers. And then they finally had sawmills, first the up and down sawmill and then the circular sawmill for sawing out this lumber.
I would also think that you were talking about joinery crews going around. Masons are in sort of short supply, and those foundations that you go into these old barns, they're works of art. And I just can't imagine restoring one now, finding the right person to do it.
No, that's right. Some were done with fieldstone in the early days, and then mid 1800s or so, they started cutting granite blocks, and you'll see granite block foundations.
Yeah, no poured concrete back in colonial days. Another example that we have is a Yankee barn that was owned by the Carey family. What makes this barn unique, John?
Well, first of all, it's on a well-traveled road in Francistown, New Hampshire. And then the other thing that's special is that they always decorate the door by season. So you see the flag is the summer decoration. There's a fall wreath, a Christmas wreath. And this is an elderly couple. And if those decorations aren't changed about the right time, neighbors literally stop and grab a stepladder and help them put it up. But it's kind of a sign of the season on what is mounted on the Carey barn door. And that's a beautiful example of a Yankee barn, very well maintained. And he's in his 90s. He recently hired having a whole new roof put on it because he wanted to be sure it carried on after his lifetime.
Oh, that's wonderful. I would imagine that the great leveler here is time, just the amount of time that the barn, is subject to the forces of nature, and also just the time it takes to restore them. It's going to take forever to do something like this.
Right, it can be expensive too. We use the word preservation. Restore means bringing exactly back to the way it was, and sometimes that's more expensive than what some people can do. So we say, do whatever you can to do a nice job, and preferably use a barn contractor who knows what he's doing with these and uses timbers and so forth versus, southern pine 2x4s.
Right. John, we've got about 2 minutes left. Let's just, I saved the best for last. This is a barn that is near and dear to your heart and home. It's the barn where you grew up. And to me, this looks like a classic example of several different barns or several different ideas and that look very New England. Tell us about your home farm.
Yeah, this is made up of 3 barns and probably one of the bigger sets of connected buildings in the Upper Valley. In the middle, in the forefront of in the picture, there is an English barn,
Oh,
and
yes.
then more of a Yankee barn off to the right, and then facing us is what we called the horse barn, which was built around 1920. And this farmstead was typical of New England farmsteads and having a lot of auxiliary buildings. So you had a chicken house that's in the foreground. There was also a water house, we called it. We had a corn crib building. And these barns were like 1850s, thereabouts. And they were built in stages, with the latest one being built in 1920.
And just sort of added on, just one after the other as needs arose.
Right. And they're all connected. You could go through all those barns without going outdoors.
What's your advice for someone who buys a property with an old barn on it? What's your advice to them?
Well, first of all, assess it and consider yourself a steward for that period of time that you now own this barn. And we always say take care of the basics of foundation and roofs, and try to keep up with things. Don't get overwhelmed by things. Get some help from historical folks in New Hampshire. We have barn people who will come and do assessments and tell you what needs to be done to the barn. But don't let it go and don't get overwhelmed, and try to take care of the basics. Even if something blows off, replace it, because when that wood that's underneath gets exposed to weather, it just can't handle it. It's so dry from the years that
Right.
it soaks up moisture like a sponge. So
Preservation, not restoration. John, thank you very much. Wonderful to talk to you as always. Preserving old barns, preventing loss of a valuable resource is available wherever you buy books or from your local library. Another valuable resource to be sure. That takes care of another edition of Across the Fence, another valuable resource. Thanks to everyone here at WCX for making this program possible, and always thank you for stopping by Across the Fence.